Welcome back, everyone, to Stories That Shouldn't Be Told. In today's episode, I'm sharing a chilling tale from the Oregon coast about two friends, a quiet night of fishing, and the boat that should never have been there. Every story is a warning. Some waters should never be fished. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with anyone who loves a good scare. And let me know in the comments, would you ever go night fishing after hearing this? Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. I was 21 when this happened, spending another summer working at my uncle's bait shop in a small fishing town on the Oregon coast. My buddy Jake and I had just finished our shifts and decided to do some night fishing off the old wooden pier that stretched about 200 feet into the bay. It was something we did pretty regularly. The pier was usually empty after dark, and the fishing was decent. We grabbed our gear and a cooler of drinks and headed out around 10 p.m. The pier groaned and creaked under our feet as we walked to the very end where the water was deepest. There were no streetlights out there, just the moon casting pale silver streaks across the black water and the distant amber glow from town behind us. The air was thick with the smell of brine and seaweed, and a cold mist rolled off the bay, making everything feel damp and heavy. We set up our rods and opened some drinks, listening to the rhythmic slap of the tide against the barnacle-crusted posts below. About an hour in, Jake caught a decent-sized rockfish, and we were feeling pretty good about our night. That's when we noticed the boat. It had appeared maybe 50 yards out, just sitting there with no lights on. At first, we figured it was just another night fisherman who didn't want to spook the fish with bright lights. But as time went on, it became clear they weren't fishing. They were just sitting there in an unnatural stillness, no movement at all, like they were carved from the darkness itself. The silence around them was wrong. No engine puttering, no splash of lines hitting water, no voices, just dead quiet in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. Jake started getting uncomfortable first. "Dude, that boat's been there for like 30 minutes and hasn't moved," he said, reeling in his line. I told him to relax, that they were probably just enjoying the night like we were. But then we heard the engine start up, and the boat began slowly moving toward the pier. Still no lights. The sound of the motor was low and steady, cutting through the mist like something stalking prey. As it got closer, maybe 20 feet from the pier, the engine cut out again. We could make out two figures on the boat, but couldn't see any details in the darkness. One of them called out, "How's the fishing, boys?" in a friendly enough voice. Jake and I looked at each other, and I called back that it was pretty good. Then there was silence again, that same unnatural quiet that seemed to swallow every sound. The boat just sat there for another 10 minutes, bobbing slightly with the tide, but otherwise perfectly still. Jake was packing up his gear, whispering that we should go. I was starting to agree when we heard a splash. One of the figures had jumped into the water. I stood up and peered over the edge of the pier, trying to see what was happening. The water was black as oil, and I couldn't make out anything below the surface. "What are you doing?" I called out, but got no response. Jake was already heading back toward shore, leaving his fishing rod behind. I was about to follow when I heard wet hands slapping against the wooden posts under the pier. Someone was climbing up. My blood went cold. I grabbed our tackle box and ran after Jake, but before I could get far, I heard heavy footsteps on the pier behind me. But these weren't normal footsteps. They were too heavy, too fast, and made a wet slapping sound like something waterlogged hitting wood. It was wrong, all wrong. I turned around and saw a dark silhouette standing where we had just been fishing. The figure was tall and seemed to be wearing all dark clothing that clung to their body, dripping steadily onto the planks. "Where you going?" the voice called out, and it had changed. It was no longer friendly. It was cold and had an edge that made my skin crawl. Jake and I broke into a full sprint down the pier, our footsteps echoing loudly on the wooden planks. Behind us, I could hear those wet footsteps following, and they were getting faster, impossibly fast, with a rhythm that didn't sound human. We reached the shore and didn't stop running until we got to Jake's truck. As we fumbled with the keys, I looked back at the pier and saw not one, but two dark figures standing at the end where we had been. The second person must have climbed up too. But they weren't just standing there anymore. They started moving down the pier toward us with a very strange speed, almost like they were gliding rather than running. Their legs moved in short, quick steps that didn't match how fast they were covering ground. It was like watching a film played at the wrong speed. Jake started the engine and we peeled out of the parking area, kicking up gravel. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror and could see that they tried to follow us with that same unnatural speed. But thankfully, we were faster in the truck. We drove straight to the police station and told them what happened. The officer said they'd had a few reports recently of people acting strange around the docks at night, but they'd never caught anyone. He decided to come back with us to investigate the scene. But when we returned to the pier, they didn't find anything. No boat, no people, and strangest of all, no wet footprints on the wooden planks, even though there hadn't been enough time for them to dry. We never found out who those people were or what they wanted. The next day, we went back to get Jake's fishing rod, but it was gone. The tackle box I'd left behind was still there, but it had been opened and everything inside was scattered around. But sometimes I can't help but wonder, what if they had reached us before we got to the truck? What if we hadn't run fast enough? The more I think about it, the more I realize they weren't fishermen at all. They were out there hunting something else entirely. They weren't fishermen of fish, but fishermen of people. And we had been their catch of the day, sitting alone at the end of that pier like bait on a hook. The thought of what those figures wanted, moving with that unnatural speed, still keeps me awake some nights. Whatever they were, I'm just grateful we never found out. That's why I never go night fishing anymore. Some hooks you don't want to bite. And that was the end of tonight's story, The Fisherman of People. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that should never be told. Your support keeps these nightmares alive, and there are many more waiting. Until next time, sleep well if you can.